Will democracy survive the next couple of years?
And there are so many needs that Minnesota has.
What people are saying they need right now.
Access to democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, The Answer Company. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center in Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. Firefly Credit Union, with locations throughout the Twin Cities, has proudly served Minnesotans since 1925. Firefly guides its members forward by delivering customized financial solutions to improve their lives in all aspects of banking. Firefly Credit Union, they light the way with life illuminated. Edina Eye Physicians and Surgeons, a division of Twin Cities Eye Consultants, has proudly served the Twin Cities for more than 55 years. Now in 7 convenient locations, using the most advanced technology combined with a human touch, Edina Eye offers comprehensive services by dedicated specialists committed to excellence with innovative procedures and expertise for the most advanced eye care.
If it's Friday afternoon, although you watching this don't necessarily know that, it's Access to Democracy. If it's Access to Democracy, this is Alan Miller. And if it's talking about fire safety, we're talking to Mike Scott, who is the fire chief of the Eagan Fire Department. And it has come such a long way under his tenure that we have a lot to talk about. Now, number one, you're a guy who can't keep a job. You joined the department at 18?
Yeah, I joined as a volunteer at age 18, correct?
And you've been here ever since?
Yes. Yep.
So, well, maybe I have to take back what I just said then. You actually joined the department at 12 when your father became a charter member of the Eagan Fire Department. I happen to know that. And you spent so much time at the firehouse that you were practically a regular there, but you couldn't become a licensed fireman until 18. So.
Yep, correct. I really became part of we call it the fire family when one of your family members joins the department.
And that's not the only one of your family who joined the department. There was another one also.
Yep. My sister became the first female firefighter in the 70s.
So we have a first female firefighter, we have a charter member of the department, and we have somebody who joined at 18 and has worked his way up the ladder to become the chief in a very, very challenging time, in a very different time. So let's talk about that. How have things changed in those years in terms of professionally, you?
Sure. So I've been chief for 14 years, and when I first became chief, we were one of the largest volunteer departments in the state, second only to to Bloomington. So we had about 150 volunteers, and what we were seeing from about 2007 on was just a rapid decline in volunteerism. We're seeing it across the nation, not only in Eagan, but people are too busy. They don't have the time to volunteer. And quite honestly, Eagan's changed a lot since I joined the fire department. What was once a mostly farm community and a rural community is now a very busy city, and their call volume has changed and the training requirements have changed.
And as a result, we didn't have enough volunteers.
Correct. When you're losing 15 a year, you're not only worried about the number of volunteers, but the training, the skill set. When you're having that much turnover, it takes, when you're doing something part-time, it takes longer to get better at it because you're not doing it every day. So when you're doing a volunteer position or a part-time firefighter position, it takes you 3 to 4 years to really get good at it. And that's how long people are typically staying, is that 3 to 4 years. So we not only seen not as many volunteers, but we were worried about the skill set.
Now, something happened about 2 years ago with a grant, SAFR. I don't know exactly what that stands for, but you got a substantial grant from the Department of Homeland Security, $3.4 million. And what did that enable you to do?
So Eagan's received 2 SAFER grants. One was about 2 years ago, and that was a smaller one. We hired our first 5 full-time people. And then the one you're referring to, $3.4 million, was in 2019. It was one of the largest SAFER grants in the United States. And SAFER stands for Staffing Adequately for Emergency Response. So it looks at the needs of the community and how many full-time firefighters they have, the call volume, the demographics of the community, and determines if you need more full-time firefighters. So what we were able to do with the most recent SAFER grant in 2019 is hire an additional 18 career full-time firefighters.
And of course, 18 full-time, but they're on shifts.
Correct.
And they rotate, and they have downtime, and they have vacations and things like that.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, so now, Alan, we have a total of 36 full-time firefighters, but you're right, they're divided into 3 shifts to cover 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But yep, they still have vacation and sick time and paternity leaves and all the other things that come with an employee.
and we have both male and female firefighters, am I correct?
Correct. Yep. Yeah. And we have all 3 stations staffed now in Eagan. So at one time when we had a volunteer department, we had 6 fire stations. We were able to downsize to 3 stations, but all 3 stations are staffed now with this new grant.
The central location of the stations is very important. I know you respond quicker with the 3 stations to emergencies than was possible with 6 stations and volunteers. So that's really important in terms of public safety.
Correct. And our response time from when we did a staffing study in 2017, when we were mostly volunteer, our average response was over 14 minutes. Last year in 2019, it was 7 minutes. And now with these additional 18 people, we're hoping to improve that even more this year.
Somebody wants to become a firefighter. They sign up. You give them a psychological test, et cetera, and check their background. Then they have to have training. Tell us about that. Where does it take place? How long does it take before they really are a firefighter? So
to apply to be an Eagan firefighter, you have to be certified or licensed already with the state. So that means you've already have a 2-year degree minimum in fire science. Most of our candidates, or I guess all of our candidates, because they have to be walking through the door, they have to be an EMT, because a lot of our calls are EMS, our first aid, and some of them are paramedics. So some of them have gone to paramedic school. But once they're hired by us, then we do our own academy. So it's a 7-week academy. So even though they come to us with training, every department does things a little bit differently. So in that 7 weeks, we train the new firefighters on our equipment, our community, our response models, our trucks, and all that stuff. So we spend 7 weeks of academy, and then they get placed on a shift, and we call it a field training officer program. So they're teamed up with other more senior firefighters and spend more time training. It's a lot of training.
Now, today's firefighters don't slide down the pole, do they?
We actually have 1 station with a pole, and some of the new stations that are being built outside of Eagan still have fire poles, believe it or not. It's still a faster way to get down to the apparatus bay than the stairs.
One would think so, and I always wondered when they started to go away, or you didn't see them in some of the newer stations, you wondered about that, because that's a quickie.
They're starting to come back, just like everything, right?
How about Dalmatians? Do you have a Dalmatian?
No Dalmatians.
No Dalmatian.
Unfortunately.
We have to get a Dalmatian. We'll have to get a fund up to get a Dalmatian for the Eagan Fire Department.
I think that should be a good goal for us, Alan.
It has to be a rescue Dalmatian, however, because there are too many rescue dogs that are just going unwanted.
I agree.
And
I agree. That'd be a good way to get one.
But that gives me something to look for.
There you go.
And we need a Dalmatian to be traditional.
Kind of our mascot.
Yes, absolutely. And so, how many personnel do you have now, male, female?
So currently today we have 36 full-time firefighters. 8 of them are female, and then we still have 28 we call them part-time firefighters because we really don't have any volunteers, but the folks that were our traditional volunteers were allowed to stay in the department as long as they wanted, and they sign up for shifts. So they work shifts with the full-time firefighters. They're just paid at a part-time rate versus the full-time.
And how many pieces of equipment do we have in these 3 firehouses?
You know, total, we probably have somewhere in the mid-20 pieces of equipment. The pieces that everybody really think about when you think about a fire department are fire engines and ladder trucks. We have 5 fire engines and 2 ladder trucks. But then you have boats and ATVs and pickup trucks and rescue vehicles, because 90% of our calls that we're going to be responding to are more rescue related. So we have some pickups that go to rescue calls.
And you mentioned boats. Obviously, are some of your people trained for water rescue?
Yep, everybody's trained in water and ice rescue. Eagan has lots of ponds and lakes and the river, of course. So we do get a number of water-related calls during the year. We also have an ATV where we respond out to the Lebanon Hills to the bike trail, the mountain bike trail. We go out there about a dozen times a year for bicycling accidents. Usually they're pretty severe accidents because of the speed they're going in those mountain bike trails.
And people who are using ATVs in the winter have a tendency to, well, they do 2 things. Some of them try to jump from one ice spot to another ice spot, and they end up going down. Mm-hmm. So I guess you have some of those as well.
Correct. Yep.
And as well as people who hit trees. That seems to be a problem, going too fast with not enough light.
Correct. Yeah. So the fire department, everybody thinks about the ladder trucks and the fire engines, but again, that's really a small part of the call response that we go to. So it's all the other calls that we go to, and all of our full-time firefighters are also fire inspectors. So they're out during the day doing inspections of existing buildings for the safety of our residents and our guests.
Yeah, we just had a really tragic fire in St. Cloud, of that bar that's been there for, I don't know, 70 years or something like that. Mm-hmm. And they found out it was an arson. So I guess you would have people who would investigate to see if it's an arson as well as just an accidental fire. Yep,
so one of our deputy chiefs is the fire marshal, Darren Bramwell. So he's trained on fire investigations, and he works hand in hand with our police investigators. And then on something like that, they also would call in the state fire marshal's office to help with the investigation.
And you mentioned hook and ladders. We have some high rises in Eagan today. Didn't have those years ago. So obviously, how high is a hook and ladder capable of going? Mm-hmm. And what kind of specialized training does that require?
So again, we have 2 ladder trucks. One is just a straight ladder, we call it, so there's no bucket at the end of it, and that's 100 foot. And then we have one we call it a bucket or a platform. So it's still got a ladder going up to it, but it has a platform that the firefighters can work from. That's also 100 foot tall.
So that's basically 10 stories high.
About 10 stories. You never get as close to a building as you'd like to. I often get asked now, especially with the Omni Hotel coming, that's going to be 14 stories.
Right.
How come we don't have a ladder truck going that tall? And if you think about it, in the bigger cities, St. Paul, Minneapolis, they're never going to have ladder trucks high enough to go to the top of their buildings. So typically in the United States,
we've actually seen that in Minneapolis in a couple of fires lately.
Correct.
Yeah.
Typically in the United States, the highest ladder truck you can get is about 120 feet. So we're pretty close. I get asked a lot again about high-rise buildings. Aren't I concerned about fires in them? The nice thing, unlike the ones in Minneapolis, the new buildings being built, like our Omni Hotel and then the old Blue Cross building on Yankee Doodle, they're 100% sprinkled buildings. So I worry less about them because they have a fire sprinkler system in it, and if everything's working correctly, it's going to contain the fire until we get there. It's not going to extinguish it, but it's going to contain it. And then there's standpipe systems in the stairway where we bring our hose to one level below where the fire is. We hook up our fire hoses and then go up to the next level.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So
that's certainly got to be a big assist.
It is. The fire safety, the new laws that have been out for 20, 30 years have made it much safer. Unfortunately, we have a lot of older apartment buildings that are 3 stories that don't have some of those features, but they were built before those were requirements.
Now the Omni Hotel, you say, is going to be 14 stories. So you can go approximately 10 stories, and then we'll have to get a tall ball player to reach up to the other.
Yeah, and with the Omni, again, it's a big building for us in Eagan, and it's going to be the tallest building in Dakota County. And we've been doing a lot of training with the staff from the Omni, and the construction staff's been great to work with. So not only our firefighters, but there's something in the county called the Dakota County Special Operations Team has been training on the site just to prepare if we do have any kind of emergency call out there. So we're doing a lot of preparation for a taller building in our community.
When do you get more calls, in the winter or in the summer?
Typically, fire-related calls we get more in the colder, real cold weather, because people will do things to stay warm that they typically might not do. They might start up something that they haven't used for a while. They might bring a space heater into an area that maybe the space heater shouldn't be. They might start using a fireplace that they haven't used and cleaned properly. They might have frozen pipes and they're trying to thaw their pipes. So typically, fire-related calls are higher from about mid-January till about this time of the year.
And that keeps you busy, or does that shift personnel around in terms of how many people are on or how many people are off, or is it always pretty stationary?
It's pretty stationary for the most part. Again, with most of our calls being EMS related or medical calls, the call volume stays pretty consistent throughout the year.
Now, in 2018, you were selected as Minnesota Fire Officer of the Year for the whole state.
Correct.
And who does that designating, and what does that entail?
So it's from the Minnesota State Fire Chiefs Association. There's 758 fire departments in the state of Minnesota, and it can not only just be the fire chief, it can be any fire officer from any of those departments. The nominations come from my peers throughout the state. The last several years I've been very involved with some state organizations, but really what I think led to this nomination, and I'm really proud for our city and our department, is the changes that we've made in our staffing model. We're considered pretty progressive in our changes. Everything from downsizing the number of fire stations. With downsizing the number of fire stations, we downsize the number of big pieces of equipment, which saves the city a lot of money. But it's being ahead of the curve a little bit. We did our staffing study in 2017, and since then, a number of cities are following suit with Eagan. So I think Eagan was looked at as being very progressive and not waiting till something bad happens to make the right changes. So even though I got the award, I look at it as an award for our city and our community.
Well, part of that is because we have a mayor and a city council who have been very progressive. One of the reasons Eagan is consistently picked as one of the top 10 cities under 100,000 in the country is because the fact that taxes are low, and we have a council and a mayor who stay right on top of things and are not afraid to take a chance, are not afraid to go one step ahead and set an example for the rest of the state, and in some cases for the rest of the country.
Yeah, correct. We're very fortunate to have a mayor and council that are very supportive of public safety and look at the needs for the community.
How often does a fire truck get changed over or replaced?
It's a great question. So under the old model, the volunteer model, we'd keep a fire engine or a ladder truck. Those are the big ticket items, 20 to 30 years because they weren't used a lot. Now today, we're gonna replace a fire engine or a ladder truck about every 15 years, and that might even be a little too long. And I'll give you an example. Well, they're out driving around every day. We use them when the firefighters go out. They use them for their inspections and everything, because if there's a call, they have to have their fire truck to respond. We used to sell a fire truck that was 30 years old. It might have 50,000 miles on it because it just wasn't used that much. One of our current fire engines is about 5 years old, and it's got almost 70,000 miles on it because it's
that tells you something right there.
Right. And a fire engine's about $600,000 nowadays, and a ladder truck's about $1 million. The nice thing about selling them when they're 10 to 15 years old, there's more value to them to sell them to a smaller department in maybe greater Minnesota. Or last couple of our trucks have actually gone to Wisconsin. I made sure there was some purple pride in there, as they're going over to the Green Bay state. So
That's interesting. Now, you get a call, and it seems like there's a big fire, and it's out of control. You need help from other departments. How do you go about that?
it's changed a lot. So when I first came on the department in 1983, I would tell you it was almost kind of frowned on to ask for help from other communities. It was kind of a pride thing that, let's take care of our own stuff. Throughout the years, that's changed, thankfully, because that's the way it should be. And we started something called mutual aid, probably in the 1980s and 90s, where you would request help. So if you had a big fire, you could request mutual aid from, Mendota Heights, Ember Grove Heights. When we went to the new dispatch center in 2007, countywide dispatch center, we changed it to auto aid. So you don't even have to request it. It's based on the number of alarms. So if I say, give me another alarm, I need more help here, it automatically sends different resources. And in the case of, let's say...
And those other communities are then alerted?
Correct. And other
Eagan
communities
needs help?
Yep, and other communities will come here.
And how do they know where to go?
It's with the countywide dispatch system, they're given the address. Every truck's got computers nowadays, so it's got GPS. It's changed a lot. Again, it's not like in the 80s where go past the parent farm and turn over by where that tree used to be. That's where the fire is. Now it's a point by point directions on our computers. So it's changed a lot, and I think the auto aid is so nice. We had I'll just give you an example of a call that came in as a house fire this week, and automatically was our two stations that were staffed in Mendota Heights, automatically with the start of the call that was coming to help. So there's no delay. With the new computer systems in all of our trucks, it tells you where the fire trucks are, and what is done is it says, send me the closest fire engine besides Eagan. So the system is looking at who's closer, and it says, oh, Mendota Heights is here, we're going to send the Mendota Heights truck. Or it might be a Burnsville truck or a Rosemont truck, but it's just send us the closest resource. Nobody cares whose name's on the side of a fire truck, just get some help.
That's
here.
for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, you have all that equipment in terms of computer and all in the chief's car, and I assume the assistant chief has a similar setup.
Yeah, every one of our vehicles nowadays has the computers, and I can look it up on my phone as well. We have an app on there called Active 911. It'll actually pop up on my phone, show me where the call is, give me directions, show me where the fire hydrants are. So in the wintertime when they're buried, I can actually see where the closest fire hydrant is, just looking on my phone.
Yeah, they do come around and they check and they say, dig out your, which, for instance, in my house, where the plows were pushing up mountains of snow, it wasn't so easy, but we do have a hydrant there, fortunately.
It's always competing interests. You got to put the snow somewhere, but we also need to get to the hydrants.
What about personnel? Are they all on digital or cell phones or something so they can find out if they're needed?
Yep, so every one of our firefighters has the same app that I was explaining on their smartphones or their phones as well, so they can see the calls coming in, whether it's one of our part-time firefighters. If we have a bigger call, we're still calling back part-time firefighters to come in and help. And they might be coming in just to staff the station for the next call. They might not be going to the current emergency. They might just be staffing another truck just to get ready for multiple calls. Obviously, with over 5,000 calls a year, there's more than one call going on at once pretty often.
How has Eagan changed in the time that you started till today? What would you say in terms of fire and fire safety? What's the biggest difference?
Started as chief or started on the department?
Started on the department.
When I started on the department in the 80s, again, we were all volunteer. We had five stations at the time. No, excuse me, 3 stations when I started. It was a lot more of we responded to less than 1,000 calls a year. A lot more volunteerism. I mean, we fixed our own trucks. We finished our own stations, and it was kind of a club, and it was more of a social club. And then we also went to fire calls. We were very professional and trained well. But as the city continued to grow, we were the fastest growing community in the 80s and 90s. The department continued to grow, and we really tried to keep that volunteer model as long as possible. One, because it's a proud tradition, and two, it's the least expensive model, and so we tried to keep that going as long as we could. But
So we're talking about a city that went from what, 10,000 people to almost 70 now?
Correct. Yeah, yeah, and it was just time to do this different model. You and I talked a little bit before we started the show today too, that one of the biggest changes in the last couple of years with us adding full-time firefighters is we will be responding to all the medical calls along with the private ambulance. The staffing study that was done in 2017 identified that the average police officer was spending 21% of their shift going to medical calls. And police calls are growing, law enforcement requests are growing, so something had to give. So the staffing study recommended that when we hire full-time firefighters in Eagan, that they become EMTs or paramedics, and we respond to the medicals to free up the police officers. And that's we started to do it a little bit last year as we had our first batch of full-time people, and now that we have our second batch getting out of the academy, on April 1st of this year, the fire department's going to respond to all the medicals and free up the police officers for their police calls.
Certainly a worthy advance. Now you have something called, and we don't have that much time left, the Explorer program. Let's talk about that. What is that? And
so the Explorer program is for youth that are interested in public safety. We have about 14 Explorers right now, mostly high school age kids that come to the station twice a month and do some training. They also do some statewide competitions, but it's to show them what a career in especially firefighting or paramedic might look like and see if they're interested in that.
And have you actually seen some people go from the Explorer program into becoming full-time firefighters?
Absolutely. Yep. It's been a good program, and it's not unique to Eagan. There's a lot of Explorer programs around the state. But yeah, I think it's a great program to get some future firefighters.
How many full-time fire departments are there at the moment?
So
in the state?
Yeah, 100% full-time without any, like us, we're still kind of in that transition. Less than a dozen. There's not very many. Minnesota.
The two big cities, obviously.
Yep.
Duluth, I assume.
Duluth, West St. Paul, South St. Paul. Burnsville has always been full-time since the start. And
Bloomington, we know.
Bloomington's actually all volunteer.
Is it really?
Yes, it's 100% volunteer, biggest department in the state, but they're doing a staffing study with the same organization that did our staffing study. And then you go outstate and there's a couple smaller departments that have it, like Austin, Albert Lee, just because they don't have the young folks that are in the community to volunteer.
Well, we feel secure with you people keeping us safe. And we've been talking with Mike Scott, who was our longtime fire chief and longtime career firefighter and officer of the year in the state of Minnesota, just 2018. So we thank you very much, Mike, and I would shake hands with you, but we can't do that anymore with the coronavirus, so we'll fist bump our way out. Thank you again.
Good. Thank you, Alan.